Yeah, I thought about this a little bit before I came out here, and I kind of laughed because it brought me back to some of the things we collaborated on. Um, one of the ones when we were trying to get business, we were one of the smaller companies in the business. You had IBM, you had Oracle, you had SAP, and then the little engine that could. That was us. So how do you get into this embedded at the executive level? Can't go wrong by buying IBM kind of mentality and insert yourself there. So again, I think this is where Hugh connected us and it continued into Teradata. Our collaboration continued, but it came to a different level because we're selling something much more technology based, very much ability to differentiate, but we are coming into a very mature and locked relationship. So you and I collaborate a lot and how do we get the attention? And we're trying to meet with C-level people. So I think one of the things we did, if you remember, was the book Veto, How to Sell the Vetoes, very important top officers. And we would go and do our research. We would look at 10Ks. We would get into the backgrounds of these execs. And then we would come back together and we'd build this letter, one pager that would get to exec, get their attention, and maybe include something that would get their attention to get a meeting. The right to sit down at a table with them and talk about how you could really make that happen or where it's at and it's differentiated from other people, if you remember that. And then we'd come back and say, hey, this worked. This one didn't. And we'd modify and we had a very good process and we were getting these meetings. But do you remember, one thing I think you have here when you're looking at is you have to be adaptable and you have to be creative. So we did the research and the work that most didn't. And then we get these meetings and it worked fairly well for us. But do you remember when it stopped working as well? Because I think other people started doing that. I think there's a transition more to go online. So people weren't reading letters and doing that as much. And it went down when we were online. So if you remember, how do we get back in there and get these meetings? And out of frustration, we came up with the Lunch Veto, which eventually evolved to a Coffee Veto. And it was a little bit out of frustration where you just put in the subject line, lunch. And then you had no more than 2 paragraphs and asking exec for a meeting. And that had relative success. And the theory when we talked about it was we have to stand out from the crowd. And somebody gets an email and has lunch. That's a little different. I'm going to look at it. And something you could read on just a screen without having to open up and scroll down, short attention. And we had some success when we got that, but that stopped working. So I think out of frustration, we just put coffee, which becomes even more interesting if you think back then. Now everybody's inundated with all these emails, but one that just said coffee. And we called it the Coffee Veto and joked, but that was getting like an 85 to 90% accept rate. So again, we adapted and we evolved. And to bring it full circle, why? Coffee's interesting. What's this? Why is somebody sending me something that just says coffee as an executive? And then there you'd say, can I have 10 minutes of your time? I'll meet you at your lobby coffee or at Starbucks across the street and I'll buy you a coffee, introduce myself. And that worked because you got their interest. You're different from everybody else. You got their time. It was a committed window of not a lunch for an hour or two, but 10 minutes. So it ended up working. But full circle, when you got that meeting, had you not done your research, preparation, planning, and brought that to the table in that condensed window, you just spent money and bought someone a coffee and thank you, and that's it. But we were looking for a reason to extend that 10-minute meeting to 2-hour meeting, which happened, or to call this person and come in and I want to hear more about what you're doing. So again, I think we were creative, we're adaptable, we're aggressive about our approaches that we had, all the things I think Hugh saw about us. And then we did the work to earn the right to get the bigger meeting and to turn it into something.